welcome back. In our last session, we talked about bits and bridles and reins and all the different equipment that you have to choose from. And in this session, we're going to talk about how to fit your bridle and your bit correctly in your horse's mouth so he can be comfortable. So I have my buddy Moshi here, who you can tell is very enthusiastic about doing this, and I'm going to have my buddies Ruth and Melissa demonstrate this for you. Hi guys.
Hi Jane, how are you?
I'm great.
Hi Moshi. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do, Melissa, is put the reins over his head. We always want to do that first so we have good safety and control. And at the moment I'm going to have you unhook just one cross tie so we can talk about the conformation of his mouth a little bit. Okay? That's perfect up there. So we want the bit to sit directly on the bar of his mouth, right in front of the last premolar. And if you can feel a little bit sometimes where that premolar is, right here, then there's a gap in his mouth where the bar is. Then he has a little canine tooth or to push. The geldings have this little extra tooth down here, and then his incisors are in the front. So we want to make sure that that bit sits directly up as close to the first premolar without hitting it as possible. Okay, so go ahead and finish putting that on. We're going to look and see how that fits him, this bridle. So you notice that she pulled the reins up closer to his head. Moshi's perfect, but if you have a young horse or a spooky horse, or if you're at a horse show, you want to bring it up to where she's pulled it here so that you can control the horse. Okay, so now we'll undo the other cross tie. And that's important too, because we don't ever want to leave the halter on the cross tie when you drop it, because it wouldn't be safe. It would be hanging for someone to get a leg caught in. And I'll take that for you. And you notice she takes her right arm around the horse's nose and mouth to stabilize, puts the bit in the palm of her left hand, and then looks for the corner of his mouth with her thumb, and then gently pulls up on the bit to put the bit in his mouth. And then she folds the ears forward. Come back, Moshi. And then make sure that all of the hair is laying flat and that there's nothing pinching or twisting. Okay, so go ahead and start putting the rest of the Cavesson on in the flash and the noseband. And she's going to bring the Cavesson around to the back of the jaw, and she's going to make sure that that little rubber piece or that protection is very equal so that all of the surface area is the same. And then she's going to buckle it and make sure all the keepers are put in. And then the throat latch. Throat latch is going to come under the throat and up to the little extra piece. And we're going to measure that, Melissa. I'm going to come around here. You can see it from the back. That this should never be really tight. Okay? The purpose of the throat latch is that if you should fall off and you pull on the bridle, it's supposed to help you keep the bridle on. Now, it doesn't always work, but you want to make sure that you have 4 fingers or a fist in width here as your tightness level, because when he comes on the bit, all these muscles are going to flex, so we don't want to have this too tight where it might be pinching him underneath his jawline. Okay, so go ahead and tuck in those keepers. Now, the flash is coming on now, and you can see that with this type of flash noseband that's attached to the Cavesson, it's fairly high on the bridge of the nose. That's very good, because we don't want to have this slipping down to where the cartilage in his nose begins about here. And if the flash or your drop noseband, and we'll talk about other types of nosebands another time, is too low, it can inhibit the breathing of the horse, and it can also pinch some of this very sensitive cartilage. So you can see that the Cavesson is really nearly parallel around his nose here in both jaws. And how high you're going to adjust this depends on how long his face is. Okay? And a rule of thumb is that if you can follow his cheekbone down to here and put 2 fingers in between the top of this parallel Cavesson line and the bottom of his cheekbone, you're about right. Now some horses have a very short muzzle and a very short mouth and may need to be a little higher. A horse that has a very long face, there are horses with a longer face than you, Moshi, that comes all the way down. You might have to go a little lower so that this actually works as a flash. Okay, now I wonder if you could turn this bit just a little bit forward so that the camera can zoom in. Remember we were talking about the KK Ultra? You can see this arrow, and this arrow is on the left side of his face, and it's facing forward. Then we know, that's good, then we know that we have this bit on correctly so that the three pieces that are in his mouth are laying smoothly over his tongue and will never bump him in the top of the mouth. Now we want to talk about a little bit about the adjustment of the brow band. You want to have a brow band that is wide enough. And if you have a brow band that is too wide, it's a little better than if you have a brow band that is too short. Why is that? Can you point that out to us, Melissa, that if we have a brow band that is too short, it's going to pull and have pressure on the back of the horse's ears. Okay, let him relax from that. These ears are also made of cartilage. Okay, so these are very sensitive areas, the back of his ear and the poll and the cartilage on his nose. So if you have to err on the side of not perfect fit, you want something that's a little bigger that gives this bridle more room on the back of the cartilage. Now this one fits him quite well, I think. There's plenty of room here. It's not pinching the back of his ear, and I can put my finger under here. I wouldn't want it any smaller, but this one's okay. Now, before you would walk out and get on your horse, you would want to look at him from the front, because a lot of times when we're bridling and everything should be done from the left, you're going to see that the bridle is maybe on crooked, so that the brow band is crooked or the bit is on one side higher than the other. So go ahead, and we're going to face him to the camera, and you can see that this is very level. Okay, but oftentimes I'll come into an arena and I'll see the bit like this because the rider has not taken the time, no good boy, to look and make sure that everything is parallel. So I'm thinking this looks pretty good. I also want to talk about the old rule of thumb about the wrinkles in the corner of the horse's mouth. I'm just going to come in front of you for a second. It used to be thought that 2 wrinkles here in the corner of the mouth ensured a good bit fit. But with all the new studies in technology and x-rays with bits and bridles in, it's really not so much to do with how many wrinkles, because there's horses that have fatty cheeks and lots of loose skin. But what you want to do, and I'm going to have you do this because I can't pull from the side, stand in front, take both cheek pieces and take out to the side until it lifts up, okay? And you will feel it almost touch that premolar, and you should get about 2 to 3 inches out from his face before you feel the premolar. Can you feel that? Mm-hmm. You start to take take the cheek pieces apart, and that raises the bit, and then you know how much slack you have. So if you were able to pull it out to here, that bit would be way too low. Okay? If you were only able to pull it out a ½ an inch, or he was smiling and he had his mouth open, then your bit's too high. Okay? And being very, very careful, and sometimes if I have a very sensitive horse, I'll ask my dentist to actually tell me how long of a bar my horse's mouth has, because you don't want to have your finger bit in between 2 molars, but you can, like if you're checking your horse's teeth, slide your finger up in the fleshy part of his jaw, pulling towards you, so your finger's not around his molars, and you can feel where they begin to start, and your bit should be sitting directly in front of that place. So I think this bridle looks great. So we're going to wrap up the snaffle. Jane, do you have any more questions for us?
I'd just maybe like you to point out some good rules of thumb on how tight this should be, and how much bit we should see.
That's good. Thank you for asking. All right, the bit itself should have a 1/4 inch, an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch on each side. Now with these bits that lay flat in the mouth, you can afford a slightly smaller bit than if you have just a regular snaffle. But what you don't want to have, and I'm going to have Melissa pull it, I'm going to take off the flash so we can see this, and I'm going to have you pull the bit a little bit through his mouth. So you could see if it looks like this and he has a pucker around his cheek and the head of the bit is disappearing, it's too narrow. Now vice versa, if this bit is showing me more than a thumb's worth of distance, then it's too wide and the joint of the bit won't be in the right place in the center of his mouth. You just want to have 1 finger's width, so 1/4 of an inch maybe, between the end of his cheek and his mouth. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Cavesson tightness. You want to have this firm enough that it won't slide down and not be parallel to the rest. You don't want to have a bend in your noseband when you put the flash on. Some horses have more mouth issues than others. We know that Moshi does not. So it's just firm enough that you can comfortably put a couple of fingers in. It's not pinching. I don't see bulges. I don't see a dent on his nose. It's just a casual snugness, I would say, Jane. There are horses that have problems with opening their mouths and avoiding accepting the contact on the bit, and in those cases they may become a little bit tighter. I wouldn't have it looser than this because then it becomes totally ineffective. And as well, now Melissa, would you put this flash back on? If the Cavesson is too loose, when you buckle the flash, it will pull this down and that will not be correct. And again, the flash is going to be tight enough so that you can slide a finger under, but not so tight that you start making puckers with cheeks, or the horse is looking uncomfortable or is trying to slide it around. And if it's too loose, it will actually give your horse more of a rub than if it's just snug enough. It's like having a pair of shoes that are just a little bit too big when you walk in and your foot slides in and out, then you're going to get a blister. He can get rubs from these if it's too loose. So just snug enough to put your finger under, definitely not cranked on with all of your force or all of your muscle, and then we can just have a nice comfortable fit. And you can see that he's chewing. If your noseband is on so tight that the horse cannot chew, can also not relax the pole. So it's really important that it's comfortable enough in his mouth that he feels confident enough to chew on the bit correctly. So,
yeah, and Moshi will tell you that it has to be comfortable enough that you could get a little treat in there so that he can chew his treat. So I think that's great for the snaffle, and we'll wind it up with the snaffle there, and then we'll take a look at the double bridle.